On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1967. We're going to be taking a look at Lulu, and she's going to be performing To Sir With Love. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, unfortunately, the video that I just uploaded has been blocked worldwide. So I'm going to put the link to the performance video that I watched from Lulu in the description below. I'm also going to pin it to the top of the comment section so you guys can click on the link, watch the performance, and then come back here for the analysis. And I'll see you guys in the comment section. And there we have it. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you guys can watch it again if you want to. But we are going to be jumping into the vocals for this analysis, of course. And it's funny how just a few days ago I was doing a video on The Cult as a band, and I mentioned about the vibrato that Ian had on his voice and demonstrated it as well because it went above the note, which is something that gives the vocal such a distinct quality. And this is something that Lulu also applies to her vocal. She hits that note right between the eyes, and a lot of people actually might think that this is a mimed performance, but I think it was on the Ed Sullivan show, so it would have been a case of having a boom mic just hovering above her head because it is too precise to be lip-synced. And if you do listen to that original record, you'll be able to hear a lot of difference between these vocal deliveries. So we have this approach from Lulu where she just hits the note bang on to start with, like all the great singers hitting that note right between the eyes, but then applying that expression, the stylization of vibrato at the end of the line. And when you start listening out for it, the control here with not only her breath support and letting just enough air through those vocal cords to lean into the sound, but also take a foot off the pedal. It means that dynamically her voice is so interesting to listen to. And we all know that Lulu has that capability to take her vocal tone to a really heavy and raspy place if she wants to. But this is a great example of the variety that she has in her singing in order to deliver such a clean vocal throughout here. And there are just hints of maybe 10 or 20% of rasp in there, and it's great to hear such tonal variation and quality because it's such a rare thing to have this amount of expression in one voice. Of course, we have the stills from the movie as well that the song is from, and Sidney Poitier in there as well. Lulu, as we could see, starred in that movie. This was a massive hit for Lulu all over the place, #1 in the USA as well. And just to mention that Don Black and Mark London wrote this song, and Mark was the husband of Lulu's manager at the time. Just looking at the composition, you'll notice how in the verse we've got this snare that's just coming in on 2 and 4 of the verses, but as soon as we get into the chorus, we have the snare coming in on every single beat of the bar, which really drives it forward and helps to distinguish that chorus from the verses and takes it to a totally different place. So it's something that you can look out for, but of course you'll be focusing on Lulu's delivery here vocally. So the main thing that you'll notice in this performance is the way that Lulu changes that vocal sound from being very connected to then breathy. And you can watch the whole performance again and see how much light and shade there is in this performance vocally, because there are lines where Lulu goes to such a breathy sound you almost can't hear that voice, but then you get the contrast of in the chorus being so connected and so upfront with the vocal. And this is what great singers do. They take you on a journey vocally with their delivery, but also with the lyrical content of the song. So you get so many different aspects that you can tune into. Obviously, if you've got somebody with such a great dynamic range, it gives you that opportunity for light and shade in the vocal delivery, but also it's going to have that conversational quality to it because it's something that we do naturally. When we do talk to each other, we change the volume at which we talk and we emphasize particular words. Great singers do exactly the same thing with their voice. If somebody is singing at the same volume the whole time, it gets boring very quickly. Also, by having that dynamic range in Lulu's voice, interestingly, a lot of people will think that Lulu has that ability to go from a clean sound to a raspy sound, and she knows exactly what she's doing and might have been trained as a singer at a very young age. But Lulu started singing at a very young age, but wasn't trained classically, and it's the case with a lot of singers that when they do get a break early on, and we're talking about 15 years of age when Lulu signed her first recording contract, and even at the age of 12 and 13, she was out there gigging and singing with a band, getting experience. But it wasn't until much later in the early 80s when she was singing on the London stage that she damaged her vocal cords. And then I saw in an interview that once she had actually gone through surgery on her vocal cords, so it was a really serious thing, she then started to train her voice and understand how to use it. Because up until then, she'd just been doing it naturally. And there are particular ways that you can sing that sound great, but might not necessarily be that good for your vocal cords and for your voice as a whole. Fortunately, that vocal surgery was a success, and she managed to keep her ability for singing, and if anything after that, then train her voice and have more control than she did previously with her airflow and also that raspy sound that she can get. In these kind of videos and a lot of the recordings back in the 60s, this was just Lulu singing naturally and just getting this raspy sound. Not in this song in particular, but certainly Shout. Everyone will know that song, especially here in the UK, where she leans into that rasp. That is her just naturally going to a raspy sound with her voice. And to give you guys a reference point for this performance, Lulu was 19 years of age, and having started her career at the age of 15, this was the voice that people would have been hearing on the radio. And I'm sure a lot of people would have assumed that this was somebody in their mid-20s, maybe mid-30s, because of the richness of the tone of the voice. And it's something that when you're listening to it, to think of a 15-year-old having this kind of body to the sound and having such a rich tone in chest voice. And this is the other thing to put under the spotlight, is the ability that Lulu had to take her chest voice really high in her range and then access that extra piece of vocal quality that is the rasp. It is that controlled belt, and certainly more recently belting has been the buzzword for singing, and especially with modern day artists where they're accessing their chest voice and pushing it to the top of that chest register to get that belting quality to it. And Lulu had the ability to push that belting quality to her voice to the maximum, just to relate it to the modern day industry and modern day singers, because when they are accessing their chest voice and pushing it to the top of that register, it is referred to as belting, and it is something that a lot of people want to do because of the emotion that is involved with that sound. And back in the 60s, it was almost like the voices were overtaking the technology, because a lot of singers around at that time, you had in the Beatles, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, who would belt, and they would hit those notes in their chest voice where they started to get that raspy sound. It was almost like a hard rock vocal, but back in the 60s. When I talk about technology then catching up, I'm talking about guitars and guitar effects, stomp boxes, overdrive, because with these more aggressive sounds that singers were making, they needed their guitars to make an aggressive sound as well. And certainly in the 60s and the late 60s, early 70s, the distortion started to take on a totally different lease of life for the companies that started to make these stomp boxes and have an aggressive sound on the guitars, as well as having these aggressive vocal tones. It is something that in the past I have compared particular vocalists to a stomp box and having a voice where they can just give you a really clean, soft sound if you want it, but they've got that extra gear that they can just step on that overdrive and give you a totally different sound and place that they visit with their vocal cords, and Lulu is certainly in that bracket. I think anybody listening to her version of Shout, As soon as you're hit with that intro, it just knocks you back and instantly gets your attention because of the belt, because of the chest voice. It's the kind of thing that will never go out of fashion because it's ingrained in all of us to have that reaction to belting and really pushing your range in chest voice. And the most successful artists that are around in the current day industry use this belting technique. They are pushing their chest voice. Ed Sheeran is a great example of a guy who can sing softly and give you that singer-songwriter sound with his acoustic guitar, but also he can push his vocal in chest voice, and that's the part that really puts it into a different league. It's something that everybody notices, even if you don't know technically what's going on with the voice, and that it is pushing chest voice to the top of the range that achieves that sound. You know emotionally when it's happening, and Ed Sheeran, like I said, is one of those guys that does that, but also Adele, another great singer here from the UK, who unfortunately did have a problem with her voice from pushing chest voice, because that is what she used to do in a similar scenario to Lulu, having that raspy sound to her voice at the top of that chest voice range, to the point where she started to damaged the vocal cords and then had a little bit of problem, had some vocal rest, but then would train her voice in order to control that as well, because it is something that can be achieved with a lot of training in order to minimize the amount of air going over those vocal cords, because that's what will damage them. We are going to get into Lulu's story very briefly. I've already said about her getting a break very early on, only 15 years of age, and this was Marion Massey, who was her manager at the time, who managed her for 25 years in all, who really oversaw her career and got her that deal with Decca. And her big break came when she released her version of the Isley Brothers' Shout, which is a song that I've already mentioned, but it's something that I've seen in an interview as well that she didn't originally want to do because she thought it was an old song, and especially when you consider that she was only 15 years of age, she would have seen it as a previous generation maybe of artists with the Isley Brothers, but still very much a kid and being shot into the mainstream music industry. In 1965, she released Leave a Little Love, and in 1966, she then signed with Columbia Records, and this is when she released her song, and it's actually a song by Neil Diamond, and that was called The Boat That I Row, and that was another huge hit because it got to number 6 here in the UK charts. So in 1967, To Sir With Love was released, the movie and the song, and this is the year that we're looking at here. And it was a huge hit, like I've said. It sold over 1 million copies in the USA, went to number 1 everywhere, and she had multiple TV shows here in the UK as well. She was massively popular here in the UK. Everybody knows Lulu. Just to let you know that on the show that we have here, or had, called Top of the Pops, Lulu was the only female performer to appear in every single decade that ran for. And I think it was 5 decades in all. And the only other artist to achieve that was Cliff Richard. And you can find Cliff Richard on the channel here somewhere. But it gives you an idea of not only her popularity, her sales, but also just the consistency to have 5 decades of hits and always appearing on that show. Just referencing the shows that she had here in the UK, that performance from Jimi Hendrix where he starts playing Hey Joe and then stops and starts playing Sunshine of Your Love, that was on Lulu's show. And around this time as well, she got married to Maurice Gibb, the Bee Gee, and I think Barry wasn't very happy about that because they were very young. And when we're talking about 1969, she was only 21 years of age. So that same year, she entered the Eurovision Song Contest. I think it's something that initially she wasn't crazy about entering the Eurovision Song Contest, which is a contest in Europe where every country has a song and they compete with their music and vote for each song. And it just so happens that the song that Lulu sang, which was Boom Banga Bang, that won the whole competition. So it was massively successful for Lulu. In 1969, she released New Roots, and on Mr. Bojangles, the slide guitar is played by Dwayne Allman, and you can find Dwayne on the channel here somewhere. In 1970, she had a huge hit with Oh Me Oh My, I'm a Fool for You Baby, which was a huge hit here and also in the USA. It got to number 30 over there, and in 1974, she recorded the Bond theme, The Man with the Golden Gun. In 1974 is when she recorded a couple of David Bowie tracks. The Man Who Sold the World got to number 3 in the charts here, was a huge hit, and she also recorded Watch That Man. The backing vocals were supplied by David Bowie himself, and saxophone playing as well. Unfortunately, in 1979, she was involved in a serious car accident, which was a head-on collision, and it took a long time to recover from that because she did almost die, but fortunately, after a spell in hospital, she did fully recover. In the early 1980s is when she was performing on the London stage and had those vocal problems that I mentioned earlier, so she had surgery, and fortunately, in 1981, she was back to recording, and she released I Could Never Miss You More Than I Do, and that was a huge hit. Also in the USA, it made it into the top 20 over there. Her version of Who's Fooling Who was nominated for a Grammy, and in 1986 she re-recorded and re-released Shout, and it was a massive hit again here in the UK, making it to the top 10 of the charts. In 1993 is when she released her album Independence, and that was a massive hit as well, getting to number 11 here in the UK. That same year, 1993, is when she recorded and released her own version of the Dan Hartman track Relight My Fire, and it wasn't only her, she also recorded this with a band here in the UK called Take That. And they were a boy band, very popular at the time, and they had a massive #1 hit with that collaboration. In 2002, she released Together, and this was an album of duets where she obviously sang with other artists, featuring Paul McCartney on there, Elton John as well. And the following year, in 2003, is when she released her greatest hits. In 2004, she released Back on Track and followed that up with a tour to promote that album, and also released in 2005 A Little Soul in Your Heart. And throughout the noughties, she had a lot of TV appearances, as I said, massively popular here in the UK, so it's always great when you can see Lulu at a show or on TV, not even mentioning any of her TV and film work as well, because she has done a lot of acting. Obviously, I don't have time to get into everything in this video, but she did appear as a mentor on American Idol as well. She toured in 2009 with Shaka Khan and Anastasia, and in 2015 is when she released her album Making Life Rhyme. But it's great to have a look back at Lulu here in 1967 with a great performance of To Sir With Love, because it really does showcase the dynamic quality in her voice, but also these different sections that she has, just being able to belt in chest voice if required, but having that softer sound, and also getting a clean head voice sound if she wants it. So she's got every single angle covered vocally. Thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!